Welcome into episode 212 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridgette and Scott McLaughlin. Bridgette and Scott, Patrice Bergeron spoke with the media today in his retirement press conference. Anything of note you guys wanted to start off with?
I don't think there was anything like super groundbreaking, but it was interesting to hear him talk about how he kind of knew as early as last summer that this past season was most likely going to be his last. He wasn't making any final decisions. He wasn't declaring that it was his last year, but he said he kind of went through the season with just sort of like internally, just within himself, the understanding that this was probably it, that this was probably, his last season. Um, he didn't make any decisions right after the season. He made sure he let it sink in and, give it enough time, as he said, and any player in this situation will tell you, you can't or you shouldn't make decisions like this right after the end of the year, win or lose. Like it's too emotional. You're too banged up. Like you're just not going to be able to fully think it through. So he gave it time and he said he was waiting. He was basically waiting for like that motivation or that urge to get back in the ice and start training again to hit. And he said it just never really came. And that sort of, really solidified in his mind that it was time and that he was ready to retire. He cited, the toll that it took on his body and he said family, obviously. And we know he just had his fourth child this summer. So he said it was he knew he wanted to spend more time with family, and obviously that's I think he's been able to balance that well over the years. But when you're playing on NHL hockey, like you're going to be away a lot during the season, so it's hard to do. And he just felt like the combination of all of it meant that it was time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think he went on in English for about a half an hour, and then he took more questions in French, and then he also did like a solo interview with Nesson, with Brick to talk about, and I think Brick got a lot out of him too. So if anybody missed that part, he did a one-on-one with Brick, and basically in different ways, like he was kind of general in talking about like that it wasn't one specific thing, wasn't one specific day, it was just overtime, and it wasn't like say one specific injury, it was just like soreness and waking up in the morning and just feeling not 100% when you wake up and you're sore and you're and when he said it took him longer to prepare to be on the ice, and he's like, I wasn't just going in and putting my skates on and getting out there. Like it took more and more prep as he aged, to be ready to play. And so I guess when you look at it that way, and him, like we mentioned in his written statement that the Bruins put up, that he wanted to go out on top, what he really meant was, like in his own power, not feeling like he's hurting the team, like when he still, kind of was able to give it his best. And then after that, it's tough because some players want to just keep going until the wheels fall off, but that's not what he wanted to do because, he doesn't want to feel pain all the time and didn't want to keep pushing. I was actually really surprised when he was asked, was there any moments that you like really had second thoughts about retiring or anything like that? It didn't seem like he did. I feel like he is, even throughout the summer, I would have thought that maybe the decision, he would have been a little bit more apt to want to come back, but it sounded like he never really seriously considered it. Like he just kept it open, like a never say never kind of thing, but it wasn't something he seriously considered, it didn't sound like.
The vibe I got watching him was he seemed like somebody who just was very, very at peace with his decision and seems very comfortable with it, and he was able to walk away or skate away, if you will, while still being at the top of his game. I mean, you can argue what the top of his game means, but he still went. If he wasn't at the top of his game, this past year. He's still winning Selke trophies and being a first line center on a record setting team. So uh so yeah, so he gets to go out on his own terms. Obviously, he would have liked to have not had his final game be a first round exit, the way with the expectations that that team had last year for sure. But besides that, he's going out the way he wants to go out. And for a player who, as we discussed yesterday, had some scary concussion injuries early on in his career, in the first third of his career, you definitely you walk away knowing that you have your mental health intact, and your body is in, I mean, he's gone through a lot. I mean, it's well documented the injuries he sustained on long playoff runs and what he endured, and to um to be able to walk away when he feels healthy and in a good place for him mentally and physically is awesome for him. And yeah, when you have young children, obviously people will sit there and say, "Oh, you have to be on the road so much." Well, that's life of a pro athlete. Like, here's the world's smallest violin. But that's, that's a pretty inhumane way to look at things. Like, you have young kids, doesn't matter what your job is. Like, you say you want a road trip for 2 or 3 games. Like, you're on the road for a week. Like, I don't know about you guys, but to go that long without seeing your loved ones for um obviously earlier in his career he didn't have his children. But my point is, his reasons for retiring are valid, and now he's going to be sorely missed. He still can play. The team could need him next year, but he just struck me as somebody who was very at ease and comfortable with his decision, and I'm happy for him in that aspect. And now going forward, let's see if there's a lot of exciting things to watch ahead with this team. First and foremost, it's time for the kids to really grow up now, right? Pasternak, McAvoy, Carlo, Grizzlick, others. Like, it's time. It's time. The teacher is gone, and now the students need to teach and lead. So a lot to look forward to. But that was my takeaway from the press conference. He just seems very, very comfortable with his decision to walk away at this point.
And just to quickly speak to the thing about family, like going on the road, just because we see it in broadcasting too. I was talking to Will Fleming, who is one of our baseball broadcasters for the Red Sox, and he told me that he has a young son. Well, he has 2 young sons, Bailey and Charlie. Charlie's, when Charlie, he's the younger one. When Will goes away, sometimes Will comes back and he's like, Charlie doesn't even recognize me, and that's gonna be, heartbreaking to leave and come back and have to deal with that kind of dynamic, like reintroducing yourself to your young kids, like, hey, it's me, again and again. So, I mean, and Felix, his youngest, was just born like a month ago. So he's going to be in that stage again where, dealing with a 1-year-old that doesn't understand it, and like trying to figure out who daddy is, like, that's tough.
First off, I apologize if anyone hears any banging while I'm talking. I'm not in my office because there's work being done outside my office. So I found another room that I thought was going to be quiet, and either there's also work here, or there might be something living in this cabinet behind me that's about to jump out and attack me.
It looks like you're in a closet, so it could be like a raccoon or something.
You never know. Who knows the last time this room was used? So,
well, there's a mouse that I used to see back years ago when I did overnights at WEI. There was a mouse that I used to see, and I named him Dimitri, and he would just come around and he would just hang out.
I thought you named him Adam Jones. No?
I didn't know him at that time. No, Dimitri. That's my guy, Dimitri.
Yeah, Bridgette, you mentioned the travel stuff, and that Bergeron was asked like if there's parts of the game that he's not going to miss. And at first he said not really. And then Kevin Paul Dupont asked him about like, well, what about like the training and diet and all that stuff? And he's like, well, yeah, he's like, I want to stay in shape and keep relatively on top of that. But yes, like, it'll be a relief to not have to be so strict on those things. But then we talked to Cam Neely after, and he was asked about that. And he brought up travel was the first thing he brought up. He was like, he might not have said it, but like, he's going to notice very quickly in the fall that like, oh, this is nice. I don't have to keep getting on a plane every 4 days. Like that, because yes, you're flying first class, private. Like, I get it. It's not what it is when we fly sitting and whatever. Like, you get people on either side of you and all that. Like, they're doing okay. To Brian's point, like, no one has to cry for what professional athletes have to go through, but it is also a lot of travel, and like it does. I absolutely can see like how it wears you down, regardless of whether you're flying in luxury or not. Just constantly being on the road, getting back late or early morning or whatever it might be. So, um, yeah, like that's nice. You also mentioned like you just kind of you sounded at peace and like somebody just he said like I've always trusted my intuition and instincts, and I was thinking I was like I feel like that applies both on and off the ice. Like obviously he has great instincts on the ice. You can study the game and work as hard as you can, which obviously he did, but also he just has like instincts at a level that are so much higher than every other player. Like Neely talked about this as well, how he would watch him and it's like 99% of the time he's in the right place. It's like you can go games at a time without seeing him out of position or being like, oh, usually I expect Bergeron to be in that spot. And it's like, nope, he's just always there. He's always where he's supposed to be. And so much of that is like just the way he reads the game and just reacts. And it sounds like that applies to him off the ice too. Like he just knew. Like he just knew from his body, from what it was telling him that this was time. So, I guess if you have instincts that good, you might as well trust them.
So there was a few things though I wish would have been asked that I feel like, I mean, obviously they weren't going to let him go on for an hour and answer questions for an hour. But I mean, I guess he probably answered questions for a while in French after. But they didn't ask him anything about David Krejci, who still hasn't announced his decision, about maybe conversations he had with him along the way about what he was thinking, what he was planning. Did they both last offseason sign 1-year deals thinking this was going to be their last year? Did they let the team kind of know? It kind of seems like the team did have a good idea, but I feel like there were some opportunities missed to ask certain questions about Krejci or like that part of the process. And I also thought that nobody directly asked him about the injury that he had at the end of the season, and was he more optimistic about maybe coming back before that, or did that not factor in? Like missing playoff games. I felt like that specific back injury wasn't really brought up and asked about. So I don't know, that was something that I was really hoping someone had the chance to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like I considered asking about both, but my read on it is one, he won't, with Krejci not yet having announced his decision, Bergeron's not gonna divulge any real details of their conversations, or like he's not gonna say like, yeah, we both kind of agreed like this is probably our last year. Like he's not gonna say that before Krejci announces what he's doing.
No, but it did feel worth asking about. Like you'd have to find a way to word it that was like talking about like, their decision making happening at the same time, like both of them being in the same position, and there was a way to ask it that I think could have been done.
Yeah, so the question I was going to ask, like, so I ended up not asking anything. Didn't really feel the need to. Obviously, got asked a ton, but had I asked something, it would have been along those lines. But I was going to ask just about like conversations he had with Marchand and Krejci in particular, since those are the two guys he's been with the longest. And so the injury, I mean, I got the impression based on his other answers that like this decision was more or less made before that happened anyways. He talked about, he said like he pretty much went through the season kind of understanding that it was going to be his last year, not finalizing that decision, but
my question would have been
operating under that assumption.
Yeah, but my question would have been, did that, like, were you a little bit more optimistic before that happened? Like, did that kind of kill the optimism of thinking, you know, maybe you'd go back at it. It seemed like it was, you know, something that I at least still have questions about is missing those games and feeling like maybe he was like somehow his health was hurting the team's chances to win, that kind of thing. I feel like there was more to know in that situation. And if I had been there, which I couldn't go, I have to do Red Sox today, I would have asked about the next level of leadership from the guys coming up because the team's losing their captain. Adam Pellerin asked about Charlie McAvoy, something he said in the video that the team made to thank Bergeron. But I would have asked generally about what Bergeron thinks of the next level, the next group of leaders that could come through. No one even touched on the whole captaincy thing, having to replace a captain. That I also would have liked to know the answer to. Just his thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he did kind of touch on the McAvoy answer, saying that, you know, like McAvoy and others, like he really trusts them a lot and thinks they're in a good spot. So, you know, like he's not going to say anything else, right? Like he's going to talk about his teammates, and I think to an extent he definitely believes that as well. Whether it is Marchand or McAvoy, Pastrnak, you know, Lucic coming back, just the whole core, Carlo, Coyle. You know, I think he does have a lot of faith in those guys. And on the captain, Neely was asked about next captain, and he said they haven't really discussed it yet. He said, you know, basically it'll be something that they'll discuss at an organizational level, him, Sweeney, Montgomery, and then players will also have a say. So, you know, I think that process hasn't started yet. I imagine it. I feel like when it officially went to like obviously we all knew it was going to Bergeron after Chara left, but I think that video of them doing it where they, you know, first joked around about giving it to Marchand, I'm pretty sure that was during training camp. So I would expect, you know, them to really make that decision then.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to hear what he would have said. Especially, I feel like there was more to be talked about with Marchand in particular in their relationship. Marchand, they did have Marchand on NESN, something that they recorded yesterday that they aired about Marchand talking about his relationship with Patrice, but it didn't feel like they necessarily got to some of that. I don't know when the next time we're going to be able to talk to him is either, like, or if ever. So it just kind of feels like, I wish I'm still missing some of these things I wish I had heard from him.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, Bridget, as far as questions that you wish you may have heard or you wish you could have asked if given the opportunity, I mean, anytime you sit down with somebody who's played as long as he did, I mean, he played for almost just about 20 years in the National Hockey League, and it's really wild to think, like, when you actually step back and think about how long he played. When you see the Bruins post pictures, or just go on Google and just type in Patrice Bergeron 2003, 4, 5, like go back and like look at those images of him and look at the equipment that he's wearing. It's the old Reebok jerseys, the baggy jerseys, the old cotton socks, the old, you know, whatever graphs, probably with a big skate back in the day. Like,
and he has a completely different accent. Like he's his English is not there yet, and the videos are in standard definition, not HD, yeah. And they're not even the same size as the screen is now.
I mean, the big Christmas wish hockey stick back in those days was like the original gold Synergy, or maybe the silver one, and it's such a reminder of just how long ago he broke into the league, and you for a guy like Bergeron to get away from the media and get away from it all, when he reflects on his career this summer and just going forward, think about all the memories he has and all the teammates that he's had over 20 years. Like, his original teammates were guys like Nick Boynton, Brian Ralston, Michael Nylander, Marty Lapointe, Andrew Raycroft, Joe Thornton, Sergei Samsonov. I mean, like Sergei Gonchar, like so many. And then you fast forward to this past year, and he's playing with guys like Trent Frederick and Jacob Lauko, and like it's just like
Jeremy Swayman,
like so many just, and then everybody in between, including all the championship teams and runs, and it's just I feel like it would be cool if somebody had asked him, and maybe this is more appropriate for like if he ever appears on a podcast or something, right?
Oh, we'll get him right here.
Where he has to
work on it.
Yeah, the skate pod, of course, obviously.
We'll get Raycroft to get him, and we'll just do a whole panel.
But I think it would be cool if somebody were to ask, because a lot of people focus on like 2007 and the concussion in his press conference, which is fair. But it'd be cool to get his vantage point on like Patrice, like just talk about how like the game has changed since you debuted to now, or talk about some of your favorite teammates over the years, just like little things like that, some of your favorite stories, stuff like that. I get it. It's a tight press conference and it's a tight ship that the Bruins are running. So maybe it's more appropriate for a later date. But those are some questions. Like you talk about like hearing about one of the greatest like hockey IQs I've ever seen play, talk and compare about what playing in the NHL was like in 2003 versus 2023. And just like, I mean, because Bergeron's development was in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and that was such a different game back then. And anyway, so when somebody can span their career across decades the way he did at an elite level, it's really cool to talk about how he adapted to the game and just how the game changed in front of his eyes. And when you're in the moment, maybe you don't notice it as much because you're just dealing with what's in front of you. But for him to look back now, it must be pretty cool for him.
Yeah, I mean, he skated in a preseason game with Fabian Lysell last year, who was 9 months old when Bergeron made his NHL debut. Yeah, he did talk about Marty Lapointe, so that, like, and that story is fairly well documented. But obviously, it was a special relationship for him, especially his rookie year, early in his career. Lapointe, a fellow Quebec native, really took him under his wing and kind of showed him the ropes, helped him learn the city, learn about being professional, all that stuff. And Bergeron said like that impacted how he treated young players as he got older and grew into a leadership role himself. So that's certainly one special relationship. But yeah, you're right, like it's totally changed. And as we talked about yesterday, his concussions and other star players dealing with concussions is part of the change. Like the game obviously has opened up, and there's not that there aren't dirty hits anymore. There obviously are, but there's not as many, and there's not as much defensemen who play that head hunting kind of style. Like Scott Stevens is a Hall of Famer, but like let's be honest, he was out there trying to hurt guys. Like that was part of the intimidation factor of what he was trying to do, and it's not really that game anymore. And I would say for the better. I know there's, some older school people who think that should be more part of the game, or, big hits should still have some place. But yeah, that's just obviously one area that it's changed. It's just, it's so much more skilled. Like it's gone so much faster, even just from that era, like when he got here, you still kind of had like the Devil's trap style was still kind of in vogue. Like teams were still playing that. It sort of took the lockout and some of those rule changes to really start to open things up. All the clutching and grabbing and all that. Like it was a slower, more physical grind of a game. So, yeah, a lot of changes over 20 years.
I mean, even recently that they've changed the slashing rules and like having to adjust and adapt to those different things too. I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch. I'm guessing you didn't, Scott, because you were there talking to people and writing. I'm sure you have something up now on weei.com, but
not yet, but soon after we record.
They even had some of the Patriots speak at training camp, or what is it? OTAs right now? No, training camp.
Training camp, yeah.
Training camp. And Matthew Slater had a lot of really nice things to say about how he's an icon in Boston. And it was funny because Razor goes, McCourty had all these nice things to say. I was like, that was Matthew Slater. Come on, Razor.
No.
That was Matthew Slater. But yeah, no, I mean, Matthew Slater is another one of those guys who kind of has that similar personality where everything is like calm and well thought out, and when he speaks, like, you know, it's going to be something intelligent. And he paid Bergeron that compliment, saying that like he started to know who he was because of what he did in the community, and learn kind of about more who he was and how he played, just because he had that persona in Boston that had gotten like larger and larger. So
yeah, along the lines of like questions that I would have liked to have, like, if it was just, you know, no time limit and like we could have just sat there all day. Like, in these situations, like, I always like to hear, you know, was there anyone you heard from that you were surprised by or was kind of unexpected? And like in my head, I was wondering, like, you know, like, I wonder if he heard from Tom Brady. Like, that's, you know, when people talk about these superstar Boston athletes who are here forever, it's like it was Bergeron with the Bruins, Brady with the Patriots, Ortiz with the Red Sox, of like guys who just spanned multiple decades and all overlapped. And you know, I know, like, not that Bergeron and Brady were like super tight friends, but obviously they crossed paths a lot. They did, you know, whether it was charity events or just being around the city. Like, I know Zdeno Chara talked about that a little bit last year during his retirement press conference about, you know, crossing paths with Brady over the years. And, you know, I was just wondering, you know, whether it's that or like someone else. Just, I'm sure he's gotten a million texts over the last 24 plus hours since he announced it. But you know, I wonder, like, if there is anyone that stood out.
yeah, that is always interesting to hear, but I'm sure it's got to be everyone under the sun. It has to be.
I'm sure he hasn't even been able to get back like to everyone yet, because Bergeron's the type of guy who he will respond to everyone at some point. But
let us know when he answers your text, Scott.
If it's yeah, I'm last.
And when you say everyone, like, that's exactly right. Like, if Glenn Metropolit or Petteri Nokalainen text Bergeron, he'll respond to them. Like Peter Schaefer. Like, I know I'm just kind of picking at the 2017, but like, my point is, like, when you think about, like, because you see these videos of like players around the league and Bruins talking about like what he's meant to them and what he's meant to the game. Like, if you think about Bergeron, his entire career, he must have, for the Bruins alone, let's take away international play, for the Bruins alone, he probably had at least upwards of, I don't know, 175 to 200 different teammates. I mean, I feel like I'm lagging right now, which sucks because
you're good. You're good.
You can hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
He's probably had upwards of a couple hundred teammates. So there's a lot of players that'll be reaching out to him saying like congratulations and all that stuff. And I mean, it's fascinating when you think about, like, he's been here so long. He's had so many different like renditions of line mates and running mates for extended amounts of time. I mean, you think back to when he first came in, like we said earlier, it was Michael Nylander and Sergei Samsonov, and then there was the Brad Boys and Marco Sturm era. Then there was, you know, Mark Recchi and Chuck Kobasu, Mark Recchi and Brad Marchand, Tyler Seguin, Brad Marchand, Jaromir Jagr, Brad Marchand, Riley Smith, Louis Eriksson. I mean, and eventually you get down to David Pastrnak, who was perhaps his best right wing of all, obviously, and then, you know, even down to Jake.
Perfection line.
Yeah,
they don't call him the perfection line for nothing.
It's just amazing the amount of guys he's played with, the amount of running mates he's had on his line, and it just never skipped a beat. And so yeah, I'm sure he has some out of the box people hitting him up, but I bet you he has a lot of players, maybe even guys that only had a couple of years in the NHL, but he meant a lot to them, and they can call him his teammate, and probably a highlight of their career to call him Bergeron their teammate. So.
And I presume even people that didn't play with him, like,
of course.
I mean, there's got to be so many people. I'm sure he's heard from Bruce Cassidy and some of his older coaches and different people like that. And I just thought of this. That's one other thing that I wish I had heard the answer to, which was, did he take, like, when he was considering all of this, the retiring or the staying, did he ever think like, oh, it would be cool to captain the Centennial team? Because I feel like it sounded like he didn't even really think about that kind of stuff. But
yeah, that was alluded to in one question. Like, I think it was the same question he was asked about, like obviously you still have something in the tank. Like, did you, I forget exactly what the question was, but like it was in that where it was like, you still have something in the tank. It's a centennial season. And like that was kind of alluded to. And, I think his response was basically just like, it sort of all got taken into consideration, but ultimately, like, he just had to be honest with himself and basically just let his body tell him that it was time, let his body and his mind, and it seemed like he was leaning that way from last summer on. And I got the impression that like it never really swung to, I think I'm gonna keep going. I think it was always, he was at least leaning in that direction, and then he just gave it the time he needed for it to really settle in and become final.
And in terms of people saying he took like a dramatic amount of time to like announce it, I disagree with that, because you have to be sure. Like you don't want to pull a Tom Brady and unretire. So you trying, that is, the more dramatic thing would be like, oh, I'm unretiring now. So you have to be sure. I think he announced it the day after his birthday. So I don't know if the timing was part of the timing of him announcing it, but yeah. So I don't think that's a fair thing to say. I've heard some other things that have pissed me off on Boston sports radio since the announcement. Like, he had a good but not great career. Like, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't really know what you're categorizing as a great career. So someone was comparing it to Paul Pierce. They were both like good but not great because they didn't win as many times as they should have. Or it pisses me off. Like, that kind of stuff pisses me off, because it's just like being negative for no reason. Like, we all know they could have won a Stanley Cup a few more times. I mean, they were in the finals more times than they won, even this year. But it's just a stupid argument. It's a stupid conversation. You sound dumb if you go, oh, it wasn't a great career. Like, come on.
Yeah, well, and there's like the semi straw man argument of like, well, he's not Sidney Crosby. And it's like, well, no shit. Sidney Crosby's one of the 10 best players in history. So, like, you got him. Oh my God, he's not one of the 10 best players in NHL history. But it's like, but then they'll find like the one person who texts or tweets in and says, I'd rather have Bergeron over Crosby. And it's like, all right, but I mean, you could do that with, like, you'll get that with anyone. Like, I bet you could find some psycho out there who says they'd rather have Mac Jones than Tom Brady. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, so like you can't just go by like the one or two outliers. I think most fans who love Bergeron to death can acknowledge like he's not Sidney Crosby, but like that's not an insult. That's just saying he's not one of the 10 best players ever. Like that's fine, guys.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't like that he didn't have a great career argument, because of it's just it's a weird argument to even start to make. But in our business, people do it just to piss other people off.
I guess being a top 5 player of all time for a 100-year-old team and a first ballot NHL Hall of Famer isn't a great career, but it's okay. We'll let more accomplished people, I guess, judge Bergeron's career. But
yeah, well, there's a reason why Scott's part of putting together the Centennial team, and a few of these talk radio shows aren't.
Yeah. So anyway, one crazy thought too is I don't know why this popped into my mind while recording this episode, but well, I do know it's Bergeron's retirement, and it's like the future of the center ice position is a little bleak right now, and so it made me think, like, just thinking about the eras that he's played in and the teams he's been on. It's so strange to think that from 2007, 2008 through 2010, 2011, so for 4 seasons, the Bruins had the possibility of rolling out a 1-2-3 center iceman punch of Marc Savard, Patrice Bergeron, and David Krejci. And I know in 07-08, Krejci kind of came on maybe after the season opener, but regardless. So for 4 seasons, the Bruins had Bergeron, Marc Savard, and David Krejci on their roster. That's 328 regular season games. But unfortunately, due to injuries and mainly injuries, Bergeron lost the entire 07-08 season. Savard lost half of the 9-10 season and the majority of the 10-11 season. They only got to play how many games together, would you say, as a 1-2-3 punch in one form or another? Maybe 75 to 100 of those 328 possible regular season games. It's amazing that's an amazing combination. And we never got to see it really, not nearly enough as it was readily available on their roster. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, and it feels like this might not be entirely accurate, but it feels like the only time in there where like they actually were all together for like a meaningful stretch was 08-09 down the stretch and into the playoffs, which is why, when you look back on that team, it's like like that was a team that could have won the cup. Like that team was pretty stacked, and having those three at center is a huge reason why. And I'd have to look back on in like at ice time or whatever, but I remember like that they would always, like, if someone would post a depth chart or whatever, like it would always be Krejci that was listed third, like that was the third line. But there are times where like it almost felt like that was the second line and Bergeron was almost the third line. Like I think he was with Recchi and
Kobasu.
Kobasu, yeah. And it almost felt like that was like the third line. And it's like, but that's just crazy depth. Like that's just absurd. But yeah, you're right. Like we were definitely robbed of, and who knows if they keep it all together, right? Maybe, if Savard stays healthy and you have him into his mid to late 30s, I don't know, at some point, maybe you try to capitalize and trade away Krejci. Like, who knows? There's that whole alternate universe of what actually happens had they all stayed healthy and had you gotten, a full season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons with those three together. But yeah, you never did outside of really that. Again, in my mind, like just that one stretch in, spring 2009.
Yeah, I feel like for the majority, I know Bergeron got a concussion in 08-09 with Seidenberg, but I don't know if it may have been like 15 games he missed, but for the majority of that season, like they were together, and your lineup was your depth chart was Savard, Lucic, Kessel, and then Bergeron, Kobasu, Recchi, and then Krejci, Wheeler, Ryder, and then the fourth line was like Axelson, Stefan Yell, and maybe Sean Thornton. But yeah, it's like so it's just unfortunate because in 07-08, Bergeron literally went down for the season in the first 2 weeks. And at the time, we didn't know anything about David Krejci. But in retrospect, looking back at it, that you know what I mean. So you lost Bergeron that year. 08-09, for the most part, they were together. 09-10, Savard gets hit by Cook, and then he comes. And then so he's kind of down for the count, and he comes back for the Flyers series, and then goes back down, and then Krejci goes down. And then 10-11, Savard got hit by Matt Hunwick, and he was down. So now, obviously, that season ended up pretty good for the Bruins. Just an embarrassment of riches. That you never got to see it fully through, not nearly enough. I mean, but it's just ironic because I just think back to the eras, and it's like, holy crap. I mean, the Bruins from 07-08 till 13-14, man, they had some. They got a cup, but they were a cup contender, I think, honestly, for like 6 straight years. That was some impressive talent that those teams had.
Yeah, I was just looking back at the 08-09. Savard and Krejci played every game. Savard had 88 points, Krejci 73, and then Bergeron missed 18, so he played 64. And his like now that you think back, it did take him a while to get back up to speed after missing so much time, and he ended up with just 39 points in 64 games, 8 goals. So clearly wasn't back to full strength. Remember, he already had a couple 70-point seasons on his resume at that point. But yeah, still, even if that is your quote unquote number 3 center, Bergeron getting back up to speed is that's still such an incredible luxury.
Well, to connect that to the one last thing I think we want to talk about, that's not what your top 3 centers look like anymore. You don't, that's not, it's far from that. So we did get a little bit of information about, because we spoke yesterday, we were recording back-to-back days here, but about how, you know, the potential of maybe trading for a number 1 center, that it doesn't seem like that's what's going to happen. Don Sweeney was asked about it on NESN, and he actually gave some really decent answers that were, you could read into a little bit. There were more informational. He gave more information than I thought he would. Though it is like political in a way, like he says things carefully. He knows what he's doing, but he was willing to say a few things, kind of insinuating that this is the group they have. And Zacha was part of the plan from last season. When they brought him in, they actually weren't sure, 100% sure Bergeron was coming back even for this past season. So they had already been thinking about bringing in Zacha and how he's kind of the main piece to this plan to succeed Bergeron. And it made me think, well, I don't think we're seeing any big trades. It didn't seem like that was part of it, but it was more like, all right, this is the roster we have, and we're gonna, you know, we think we put the right pieces together. Obviously that's something they would say, but yeah, it seemed like there's no massive move coming around the corner to try to replace 1C.
Yeah, and Neely was asked about it too, and you know, similar to Sweeney, like basically said like we're exploring everything. You know, he was asked, you know, will you look outside the organization? He was like, you know, we're gonna have to look at everything, and he was talking more big picture versus like immediate future right now. But yeah, like obviously they've tried to getting Zacha was a big one. They've drafted more centers in recent years, thrown more darts, but you know, Neely kind of even made reference to it. Like it's hard to really assure yourself of an impact draft pick when you're contending every year and you're trading away so many high draft picks, which I know people don't like to hear as an excuse because it's like, hey, they've still had a couple first round picks. They've still had some second round picks, but not as many as some other teams, and they haven't been high. So it's a factor. It doesn't totally excuse them not having a better succession plan, but it is a factor. And, you know, my read on it is they are probably sticking as is for right now, just because I don't think the market is out there for them to go find a top 2 center right now. You know, and I think you reevaluate it in season, reevaluate it pre-trade deadline, or even next summer when you're going to have more cap space, you know, more flexibility to do something. I know, you know, one of the biggest names just got locked up today who could have been on the market next summer, Sebastian Aho down in Carolina, re-signed on an 8-year deal, which I don't think he was ever really going to get to the open market. I can't imagine the Hurricanes were ever going to let that happen. But, you know, if you were trying to project ahead, like he's someone who at least would have been on the initial list until he was signed, but now he has been signed.
Yeah, and then we had gotten one comment on our last video from yesterday about DeBrusk. Like, would they be willing to part ways with DeBrusk, or maybe some sort of a package that included DeBrusk to try to fill their need at center?
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know if they're trying to give away top 6 talent right now. I know you're trying to acquire top 6 talent, but I just don't know if
so either. But it actually kind of made me think about how much DeBrusk's value has changed over the course of 2 seasons, and that like we thought he was going to get traded at the trade deadline. Was it 2 years ago? He comes back, starts playing better. All of a sudden, he's a top line guy, a consistent goal scorer, playmaker, and now you're like, okay, well, we can't afford to lose him. But back then, it was like people were like, get rid of him. But totally has come around from that point. And that's what made me think, because like you could get a lot more back for him now than you could have just thinking back to those times where right around the time that he asked for a trade.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if if you were part of a package and it was like DeBrusk and like Olmark or something, I mean, I'm not really good at playing like video game GM. It's just one of those things where it just doesn't seem like it's out there. And I agree with Scott. I think they're just gonna run it back. I think one thing that you can maybe hope for is that maybe there's a hidden top 2 center in Morgan Geekie. I know if you look at his NHL track record, he's been a bottom 6 forward in Seattle, and
I feel like that's like trying to make Eric Halla a top 2
well
center.
The thing is though, yeah, but so Connor Ryan wrote something for was it the Globe? He works for the Globe now.
Yeah, he works for the Globe now.
Globe, Boston.com.
It was something along the lines of how Morgan Geekie was like a top like 30 scorer in the NHL this year, went like points per game, like based on his minutes played or something along those lines. Like
it's 5-on-5 per 60 minutes.
Yeah. And he has impressive numbers. And basically the moral of the story was like, with an accelerated role, an amplified role in Boston, could he be something? And maybe you can put Charlie Coyle in a more natural 3C spot. I don't know. They're gonna have to try to make things work as is my point. They're gonna have to hope for the best. I just don't think the 1C option's out there right now. And but it'll be interesting. Look, if you're looking for things to follow this year, it'll be interesting to try to watch this team come together and try to mature into more leadership roles and see if they can put together a good season. I mean, hockey's a team sport, and anything can happen, and they can certainly put together a good season. And I think it'll be fun to watch. But I do think they're going to try to go with committee right now, center by committee, and hope for the best.
Yeah, and as far as trading DeBrusk, like I guess I would be more open to it if it's for a bona fide top 2 center. Like obviously, we were all in agreement. We didn't think it made any sense when the Jean Gabriel Peugeot rumor popped up, because it's like Peugeot is more or less Charlie Coyle, a really good number 3 center, but you're stretching it a little if you put him on the second line. The problem is if you trade away DeBrusk, now you're down another top 6 wing, and I already think you're in a position where ideally you would be looking to add another top 6 wing, not subtract one. If you could guarantee me that maybe not for opening night, but at some point in the first half of the season, Fabian Lysell is ready to play on a second line, okay, maybe I start to consider it. But I don't think you can't guarantee that right now. Like, we just haven't seen enough. So maybe, we talked on the last episode about, all right, what do they do if they're not really contender this year, or they're just sort of fringe or sort of out of the playoff picture? Well, DeBrusk could, if you're not signing DeBrusk to an extension by that point, he's in the final year of his contract. So like, he would be a very, very valuable piece, and maybe use that not to just try to add, a pick or a prospect, but in some sort of package to target a center in season. Like it's all on the table just because there's so many ways this season could go. But yeah, I mean, right now it feels like you would just, if you're trying to trade DeBrusk for a center, like, okay, you're helping at the center position, but now you're down, another wing, and you need help there as well. So,
and who would want to part with a top 2 center for a top 6? It's just not a fair trade-off. So that's why maybe you'd have to like give Allmark too, but then you have to deal with like, can somebody fit both those guys under a cap and blah blah blah. So it just gets tricky. But in any event, Bridgette, I know you have to round the bases pretty soon here. So
I do.
Do you guys have any final comments before we sign off?
No, I'm all good.
All right, Scott, figure out what's in that cabinet behind you and don't try not to get attacked.
I'm absolutely not opening that.
Tell Dimitri I say hi.
Bridgette, enjoy your Red Sox shift. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
not in front of a screen, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs